I know everyone's saying, oh, there was no flight to safety. Let me just say, it wasn't nothing. It wasn't a zero flight to safety.
Expanding our money supply because the Fed has been restricted. I'm going to explain that.
Credit card loans, car loans, those are short-term borrowing rates, and they are low right now.
Microsoft and Google came out and said, we're not going to reduce our billions of dollars of spending. Existing home sales, 4 million home sales annual rate. That's with a little drop.
Hey, coming to you live from Woodward Park City. We're here on family vacation. My little son, Luca, he's 8. There's my 10-year-old Savage, Aria. And then our little one over here, Serafina, jumping. We're going to talk about the Fed, talk about retail sales, talk about the Iranian conflict. Fed speakers are getting more dovish. They do this. They put out their statement, which is hawkish, and buy themselves 12 weeks. And then they all start talking dovish. Fed Chair Waller and Bowman, both basically putting out dovish statements. And they're saying, you know, if inflation is not so bad in June because of tariffs, we would consider an earlier cut. The Iranian conflict usually causes a flight to safety. And that's now kind of happening by about 15 basis points, maybe 20 basis points. It didn't happen first because oil spiked, thinking there'd be an oil problem. And then that seems to be okay with this ceasefire. So it's being called a 12-day war. And so I know everyone's saying, oh, there was no flight to safety. Let me just say, it wasn't nothing. It wasn't a zero flight to safety because basis points are down. There's a million reasons why. Inflation's down. It's been coming down. Retail sales was down 0.9%. We saw that. But what was interesting is I think it was 1.2% bar and restaurant sales were down. And so even with cheaper gas, people are not driving out to spend money on experiences. They're not going into debt more. Maybe they can't. Maybe their cards are maxed out. They're not spending savings. And so, you know, the biggest driver of inflation obviously is government spending, and the bill is kind of making its way through the Senate and the House. The Senate's version had a $5 trillion debt ceiling. The House version had a $4 trillion debt ceiling. That's a big difference. So a lot's going on there. By the way, in the winter, this is the tubing park, and you can see all these lifts. There's a bunch of lifts here. So this isn't like a full-blown like ski mountain, but it's all geared towards, like, you know, jumps and flips and aerials and all this stuff. And then in summer it's bikes and scooters, and it's a pretty cool spot. It's really pretty up here. We try and come up here a week a year, and obviously I'm still working. I work nonstop. What I would say is that with retail sales being weak and inflation being weak, and of course a little bit of a flight to safety, you know, a bunch of bombs getting blown up and supposes a ceasefire, and they're both going to honor it. We'll see about that. As I walk in the middle of a skate park, I've never been hit by a scooter before. You guys have seen a few cars almost hit me. So you know, then Chair Powell had a testimony yesterday, and he made some comments that were somewhat dovish. Like, you know what? If the tariff inflation isn't that big of a deal in the June data, we would consider an earlier cut. So they kind of said, you know, we want to cut. We have a bias towards cutting. We've been talking about cutting. Our dot plots say we're going to cut 2 more 25 basis points this year. So if inflation seems tame, and again, I've been contending all along, I'm not trying to like spike the football down and, you know, claim victory or anything, but consumers are resilient. They don't have to pay for more expensive stuff, you know, and if they don't have the money to do it, they can't do it. If they don't have a job because labor is softening, then they won't do it. They can't do it. So labor still, you know, if it continues to soften, which we're seeing some of the data show that, then maybe the Fed will want to start cutting and get out in front of it. Hopefully this all made sense. Kind of a light news week. Existing home sales was up month over month, but still compared to May a year ago, you know, overall sales is down. New housing permits are down. So the Fed is doing exactly what they wanted to crush inflation, which the second biggest driver behind government spending on inflation is housing prices. And so if housing prices continue to remain elevated but are going up at a slower pace because of higher rates that have been higher for longer, which we've all been suffering through for years now as an industry, although we've seen steady growth, then inflation's going to come down. And if tariffs not a big deal, maybe they want to continue this soft landing, meaning we have not been in a recession, we're not in a recession, we're not going to be in a recession, if that's what a soft landing is. Although most times when they raise rates, we do go into a recession. So the jury's still out on that. I'm not saying there's not going to be one. But so far, for years, we've had a soft landing. And so if they're trying to engineer that, they'll probably want to cut ahead of labor getting worse than they thought it was going to be. Remember back in December at the dot plot, they said 4.2% would be the unemployment rate at the end of this year. We've been at 4.2% for several months. And then they raised their guidance to 4.4%, which is historically not bad. But why wait until people lose jobs and can't afford anything? And, sometimes those things start to feed on themselves, and then people don't really buy a lot of stuff because they all coil back. And like we've seen in housing with higher rates, higher insurance, higher taxes. So lower rates can cure a lot. Hopefully that'll happen. So anyway, we'll keep an eye on that. Strait of Hormuz was voted to be blocked by the Iranian parliament. Yes, 25% or 20% of the world's oil goes through there, and that could hurt the one thing that's been bringing down PCE and CPI is lower and cheaper gas and oil and all that. My guess is this ceasefire and this quick end to this tactical battle of just taking out the capabilities of Iran, which is led by a death cult. I mean, absolutely led by a death cult. The people of Iran are amazing. I mean, we all know Persians, and most Persians in America don't like the current regime. That's why they led in the fall of the Shah in 1979. Was the last time the U.S. really got involved in Iran. So this isn't a knock on a religion or anything. It's just there's this leadership in this one place with a ton of oil that just kills and funds terrorism and was trying to get nuclear weapons. And hopefully, this puts a stop to their thousands and thousands of year old battle that maybe, I don't know if they'll ever get it right, but at least for a little while, maybe we'll get some reprieve, and we'll see what happens in the Strait of Hormuz. Just kind of hoping our U.S. military would take out the entire Iranian Navy. But, they don't have to produce oil either. So we'll see what happens. We could produce here. Saudi Arabia is not exactly friendly with Iran. Neither is Qatar, since they just, got missiles thrown at their country. Maybe they all start to produce a little bit more. Maybe this Russia-Ukrainian conflict gets ended in the next 3 to 6 months. We get some Russian oil back on the market, and we don't really care about what goes on in the Strait of Hormuz. I'll leave you one little funny story before we go. Downtown Josh Brown, he's on CNBC. He's I love when he talks because he's such a no-nonsense guy. And he put out this podcast last week called The Compound. And he was in Miami, and it was literally cracking me up. He was like, I am not a financial advisor. I'm not responsible for your losses, only your profits. He said the one deadlock betting on the stock market was every time some talking head gets up and talk, the Strait of Hormuz, the Horboos. The way he said it, this New York accent is so funny. Is every single time someone talked about the Strait of Hormuz, the stock market ripped. And here we are ripping, partly because the conflict ended, partly because, dovish comments from the Fed, earlier cuts are being talked about. And, hopefully it ends up being a nothing burger in the Strait of Hormuz. And, here we are pushing stock market all-time highs again. So you'll have a great weekend. I'll try and get another video out in a couple days if we get anything newsworthy, even from our family vacation. Cheers.
You've been listening to KP Talks Dollars and Cents, a top-rated show for those who want to learn about the economy and mortgage environment. Tune in each week for more episodes, and please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Kevin Perenio does not render or offer to render personalized investment or tax advice through KP Talks Dollars and Cents. The information provided is for informational purposes only and does not constitute financial, tax, investment, or legal advice. For more info, follow KP Talks Dollars and Cents on all of our social channels.